Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise for two purposes today, and I'll start with an anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is the 28th anniversary of that landmark legislation. Former Senator Tom Harkin, who served the people of Iowa for more than 3 decades, if you include House and Senate service, and who was a champion for people with disabilities, and I think that's an understatement. For many years, he was the champion. Senator Harkin used to say that the Americans with Disabilities Act was the last great civil rights law of the 20th century. The passage of what we know as the ADA helped to bring into focus a picture that started to develop really 150 years ago with the ratification of the 14th Amendment. That great amendment guaranteed equal protection under the law for all. And the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act confirmed that people with disabilities are included in that guarantee of the 14th Amendment. I think it's important to review the goals of the ADA. We've probably lost track of those goals with the passage of time. They need to be repeated. The first goal is equal opportunity. The second goal is independent living. The third is full participation. And the fourth is economic self-sufficiency. That's what we want to achieve for people with disabilities: equal opportunity, independent living, full participation, and economic self-sufficiency. The goals are not achievable, of course, without great support. To achieve those goals, we need actions from governments, actions from businesses, actions from schools and universities, and indeed actions from every sector of our society. We need actions that promote and protect the dream that is at the core of the ADA. The ADA affirmed rights outlined in the 14th Amendment. Despite those guarantees, this past year we've seen substantial, and I would argue in many instances very cruel efforts that threaten equality for people with disabilities. Earlier this year, we saw that the House of Representatives passed a bill that would have gutted Title III of the ADA, making public access an afterthought for people with disabilities. Here in the Senate, with many of our colleagues joined together, we stopped that effort. And if they try it again, we have to stop them from doing it. But these threats continue. In the past couple of weeks, we heard officials of this administration claim that segregation and institutionalization with regard to those who have a disability should be acceptable for these Americans with disabilities. The law of our land, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the 1999 Supreme Court case, Olmstead, say otherwise. They say that the values and policy of the United States are for the inclusion of people with disabilities. That statute and that Supreme Court decision does not say, or they do not say, that the United States supports segregation, isolation, and institutionalization of people with disabilities. I hope the administration will further clarify what their position is, because it is contrary to law, but it's also an insult to our values. It seems that on many days in the last year and a half, if not longer, the Republican majority, both here in the Senate and in the House, has been focused on 3 objectives when it comes to health care: rip away, decimate, and sabotage. Ripping away protections like those for pre-existing conditions in the Affordable Care Act, decimating the Medicaid program, and sabotaging our healthcare system, actions by the administration that some Republicans have not interfered with. So you have an administration that on a daily and weekly basis and over many months now have sabotaged our system, sabotaged the individual market, and sabotage people's ability to get health care. So we're going to continue to fight against that, and one of the biggest fights we're going to have is on Medicaid. Medicaid in Pennsylvania affects more than 2 million people. It has an impact because of the health care benefit it provides on 40% of the children of my state, 50% of the people with disabilities, and more than 60% of folks trying to get into nursing homes. So when it comes to Medicaid, I'm going to fight to the end of the earth to protect it. not to sit down and have a nice discussion about it, but to protect it. And if they want to take it on, we're going to continue to fight against them as long as it takes. No matter how hard or how long that fight is, we're going to fight it. Despite the progress we've made with the Americans with Disabilities Act and a lot of other progress in the interim, we still have a ways to go for the promise and the dream that many Americans with disabilities have had. We need further action, further legislation, further work in a bipartisan manner. And I hope that will be the case on two of my bills. Let me outline them quickly. Number one, I just introduced the Disability Employment Incentive Act, which encourages businesses to hire more people with disabilities. The disability workforce is robust, creative, reliable, loyal, and productive. We need more people with disabilities in competitive integrated employment to strengthen our economy and to enhance the capacity of our businesses. The second bill I have is to protect people with disabilities and their families, so we've introduced the Office of Disability Policy Act. As sabotage continues to occur by the administration, we need accurate, nonpartisan information about proposals that could harm people with disabilities and the infrastructure that makes it possible for them to participate in our society. We have a responsibility to know when a law that is being proposed or an action by an administration will benefit or adversely affect 56 million Americans with disabilities. During this month, when we celebrate the 150th anniversary of the ratification of the 14th Amendment and the 28th anniversary of the signing of the ADA, we need to remember we all have a responsibility to complete the picture and to help Americans with disabilities to realize the dream. As a nation, our duty now is to take the actions that protect and enhance the rights of all Americans, including those with disabilities, and to make equality for all a reality. Madam President, let me conclude with some thoughts about the recent debate about protections for pre-existing conditions. As I said before, it seems that Republicans in Washington have a maniacal obsession with decimating Medicaid, wiping out the ACA protections, including protections for pre-existing conditions. So now that we've changed the law, which said if you have cancer, you can still get coverage or treatment, now I guess some here want to take us back. We've got 5.3 million people in Pennsylvania with pre-existing conditions. 643,000 of them are children. We're not going back. We're not going back to those days when those 5.3 million people in Pennsylvania don't have protection. We are not going back. And if they want to have a fight about it, we'll fight about it. Last year I heard from Liz from Westchester, Pennsylvania, suburban Philadelphia, who was diagnosed with cancer at the age of 26. Here's what she told me. Quote, "For years I worried about losing my job and with it my insurance because I have costly pre-existing conditions. This stress added to the stress of my diagnosis, treatments, and work-life balance." Unquote. Then she goes on to say, quote, "Weight lifted off my shoulders when the pre-existing condition protections, plural, became law. Quote, now those protections are threatened." So weight was lifted off our shoulders because of an advancement in law, because we protected people with pre-existing pre-existing conditions. Now, some people here want to add that weight back onto her shoulders. That has to be stopped at all costs, and we will stop it. This latest scheme, this court case, trying to overturn pre-existing condition protections, is why Senator Manchin and I are leading the effort on a resolution to authorize the Senate Legal Counsel to intervene in Texas versus the United States, the case. This would be devastating for millions of people across the country. I mentioned 5.3 million in Pennsylvania with pre-existing conditions, 133 million across the country. Any of us, all of us, are vulnerable when the pre-existing conditions protections are targeted. It is outrageous that the Department of Justice is weighing in against the law of the land and arguing that these protections for individuals with pre-existing conditions should be struck down. We must defeat this cruel attempt to rip away these protections. And I'll fight every day to make sure every American, no matter where they live or what their health status is, has access to the health care that they need. It's good that we're celebrating the 28th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. We're happy about that. But at the same time, we need to be vigilant against attempts to undermine progress that we've made since the ADA and progress we've made more recently. Madam President, I would yield the floor.